The sun is up, the day is wide open, and life still has so much to give. Every laugh, every step, every shared moment says the story is still unfolding beautifully. You are not finished yet. Your story continues.
Most people think life follows a straight line. Education, career, retirement. But for many, that line changes. Sometimes by choice, sometimes by circumstance, and sometimes by a moment they never expected. This is Not Finished Yet, a podcast about people who started again and discovered their most interesting chapter was still ahead. Each episode shares real stories of reinvention, the risks, the decisions, and what it actually takes to build something new later in life. Because the truth is, you're not starting from scratch, you're starting from experience. Can I just add that the views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect those of any organisations, employers or partners connected to them. Before we start, a quick note. A large number of people who listen to the podcast haven't yet subscribed. If you find these conversations valuable, hit subscribe or follow on your platform. It makes a huge difference and helps us keep sharing these stories. Now, let's get into this week's story.
Okay, I think we're there. Lovely, welcome. So, thanks for coming on. I'll just get straight into it if you don't mind, Richard. Most people think reinvention has an expiry date, but what if your most creative chapter is still ahead of you? Today's guest proves that curiosity can completely rewrite your story. Our guest is Richard Sparks, an English-born writer now based in Los Angeles. Hopefully that's correct.
It's
and
good,
the author of the New Rock Fantasy series, which I'm fascinated to understand about, including his latest release, New Rock, New Rules. Richard's journey is anything but typical, from writing comedy for the iconic British shows like Not the 9 O'Clock News and The Secret Policeman's Ball, to collaborating with legends like Rowan Atkinson and John Cleese, to discover a gaming life later in life which completely reshaped his creativity and led him into writing epic fantasy worlds. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Mark.
So jumping straight in, comedy to creativity, writing for British icons. So let's start off at the beginning. How did you get, your early career and talk us through that a bit?
I started writing comedy sketches when I was at university. I just bumped into my former roommate one day and said, "Where are you going?" And he said he's going to audition for a review. And I think I said, "What's that?" Knew nothing. And he said, "Oh, you should come along. It's a comedy show. You write comedy. You write funny stuff." And he knew that because I used to leave silly notes lying around when we shared a room. We had a sitting room and each had our own little bedroom off it. So the sitting room was where you did the work, the essays and stuff. And people were always coming in and out, and it was very sort of friendly that first year at university time. So the second year I bumped into him, and he remembered that I'd written funny notes, and some of them he'd kept, and actually one of them made it into a show at some point, some stupid thing I'd written. And so he said, "Come along and audition." So I did, and oh God, they made me actually audition for the show. I didn't want to be in it because I'm not an actor, but so I did an appalling audition where I had to go into an orchard and pick an apple off a tree, and it's got a worm in it. If you give that to Rowan Atkinson, he'd still be there doing it, because he's that inventive and he's that good at being in the moment. I couldn't wait to get out. Anyway, so they said, "Well, Peter says you write, so come along to the first meeting anyway." So I went away and I wrote over the next 2 or 3 days a sort of comic history of drama from the Greeks right through to the modern, Pinter and and Beckett and all that stuff, avant-garde. And we had the first meeting, and Mel Smith was there. That was his first year. So, and all the people who are going to be in it, like half a dozen of them, were all, very full of beans and exciting and funny. And eventually the director said, "Has anyone got any material?" And nobody did. I put my hand up and said, "Well, I've got something." So I read for about 20 to 25 minutes all these different sketches. The director said, "Well, there's our show." I said, "Well, you've written all these, you might as well be in it," kind of thing. I think somebody dropped out, I can't remember. So anyway, I stepped in, and with my roommate, we actually ended up having quite a fun double act. So one thing led to another, and then, couple of years later, 3 years later or so, I was in the Edinburgh Festival. That's when we first met Rowan Atkinson and Richard Curtis and Howard Goodall and all that generation of Oxford comedians. And they came to see our show, and we came to see theirs. And the moment you saw Rowan on stage, you just go, "Wow, this is the real thing." He's just brilliant. So one thing led to another.
How does it work when you write your piece and you sit down with someone like Rowan? Do they change the structure, or do they keep it the way they are? Or does it work either way, or is it just off the cuff sometimes?
There are no rules. Sometimes you write something that is just fine, doesn't need any work on it. Sometimes you write something where other people say, "Oh, look, there's an opportunity for this," or "How about that?" or "What about this funny line?" or "Supposing this happens instead." And that's what happens when you're script editing scripts for TV shows or anything. There's always a group input to it. Your job as the writer is to go away. You produce the work, and then they don't need you anymore. So the first thing that I wrote for Rowan, it was a show that was, as I said, my former roommate Peter Wilson, his then wife Elspeth Walker, and Rowan Atkinson, in a 3-person show at the Hampstead Theatre in 1978. And I'd written for Peter and Ellie before, and Richard Curtis was the other writer. He'd written for Rowan before, because they're a writing team, although Rowan's not really a writer, he says. And one day I just woke up and thought, I've got to write something for the new guy. So I sat down, I wrote the sketch that turned out to be the schoolmaster sketch that became one of his party pieces. And I typed it up and took it into rehearsal that morning and handed it to him. And he sort of looked at it. I was standing here, he was standing there, and I just said, "I've got one for you," sort of thing. I sort of shuffled up to him, and he looked at it, sort of wandered off. And I thought, well, oh, great, he didn't say this is crap. So I left it to him, and then the first time he did it in rehearsal, it was an empty room, except for the director, Michael Rudman, who was not really the right guy for it. He owned the theatre. I mean, he was the head of the theatre, but he was not a great comic, mastermind. Quite, he had some rather old-fashioned ideas. Anyway, he put the whole thing together, so more credit to him. And Rowan did the thing in rehearsal, and he just, I don't know if you've seen the sketch, but he just filled the empty theatre with invisible schoolboys that he was doing a roll call of and then doing a sketch to, and I went, bloody hell, I wrote that? What? And so you thank your lucky stars when somebody does something and lifts it. What you want an actor to do is pick your work up and run with it.
So, as a writer, a two-pronged question really. Lessons from comedy writing compared to others. What lessons did you learn there, and what comedy has taught you about creativity, if that can all be wrapped into?
Yeah, it can, because look, all writing is the same structurally. The structure of tragedies and comedies is exactly the same. The story structure, which is the hardest thing for us all to learn. Starting off writing comedy, you learn the immediacy of the impact on people. If you get the laugh, and it's a lovely feeling when you're sitting in a room full of people who are laughing their heads off at something you've written. It's just, you're sharing the vibe with them. They don't know who you are sitting next to them, but there's just that sense of community that comes into it. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, these folks like what I've written. That they get my sense of, it's our sense of humour. The same as if I go and see I never went to a recording of Monty Python, but 2 friends of mine from university did. And they came back with big grins on their faces from a night in London at the BBC.
It's a unique British comedy, isn't it? Kind of style.
Yeah, and they were great influences on us, just as Spike Milligan and Peter Cook and Dudley Moore were great influences on the Pythons. We're all products of the others. It's important to realise this. You start off. I just written a piece about this for some magazine. I think people ask all the time, what are your influences? And I always thought that was rather a sort of rude, probing question, like, who are you trying to copy? But then I realised after a bit, when I met the French singer Charles Aznavour, he said, we are all products of the others. it is impossible for anyone to come fully formed out of the forest. He's absolutely right. I've soaked up everything that I've got from listening and reading and being alive and sitting around with friends chatting, and everyone I've ever met has been an influence. And you use that, and you sort of synthesize it and push it out in the next direction.
So what's one lesson from working with all these comedy legends and that still shapes you how you create today?
I think possibly, well, maybe not a lesson, but certainly gave me validation. You always start off thinking, well, I can do this. I always wanted to be a writer ever since I was a kid. You know, I had 2 years of a job in Welsh television, which was not a very interesting job, but I left that because I don't want to have a job. I wanted to make a living by my pen. I want to make a living by writing scripts. And of course, you don't get paid to write novels straight out of university. So the fact that I'd had a bit of a grounding in comedy meant I could go into comedy scripts and then half-hour TV, and one thing led to another, often with a lot of roadblocks on the way. And sometimes where it led was, you know, you might get paid very well for some work that was not very good, which was really disappointing when you come up with something that should have been good, but the end product isn't. And that's a heartbreaker. But you know, you live and learn, and every time something gets done or something is successful, like the Schoolmaster sketch was for Rowan, which, I mean, it's remarkable that thing ever happened. But you get the sense of, oh yeah, I can do this. And when people like John Cleese believe in your work and Rowan believes in your work, because I mean, Rowan was a nobody when I wrote it, and when he did it in Secret Policeman's Ball, it announced him to the public. You know, he went on stage an unknown and came off a star, and you realize, yes, I belong there. I can do this work. All I need is to get the chances, and the way you get the chances is you have to make them yourself. Half the time you've got to come up with your own ideas and write your own scripts that nobody's going to pay you to write. See if you can sell them, get them out there, as well as doing the jobs that you're paid to do, which are commissions. So gradually everything sort of reinforces the sense that, yes, I belong here, yes, I can do this. I always knew I could, but you've got to be able to prove it. And you know, skipping forwards 40 years to the end of my life, the end of my career now, I've always wanted to write novels. And I got a few unpublished ones that weren't very good. And I was trying the wrong sort of thing that didn't fit with me, but I was just learning the trade. And then when I had the idea for my new rock series, I was off to the races, and I did it.
Let's get into that, because I taught a side shift and the unexpected pivot in such a way. You know, the reinvention moment, discovering gaming. I mean, discovering gaming later in life.
Well, yeah, I mean, you've got to keep your eyes open, your ears open, your option open. You know, for Douglas Adams, I often mention him because he was the man who really got me into gaming. Douglas was an exact contemporary of mine. He was at Cambridge, I was at Oxford, but we met and doing shows up in Edinburgh, and he had the same agent as I did, a small agency of about 30 writers with various Pythons and people in that group. Douglas was saying back, you know, he died in 98, I think. You know, these games are great, Richard, you've got to try this. And I was sort of saying, well, shouldn't you be writing? But Douglas was just well ahead of his time. He always was. And I eventually, years later, I discovered the joys of gaming and then internet gaming and just got completely blown away by it. I mean, I came into it through a slightly different angle, and I love playing poker. So I played in the World Series of Poker a few times, and I was playing internet poker in the days when you were allowed to in America, where I live. I don't play it anymore. So one game led to another, and then I found there are more games on the internet, and then gradually these amazing role-playing games emerged, where you're galloping around and you're the hero of your own story, getting up to mischief with a bunch of chums all over the world with their earphones on, and we're all giggling away in different continents. Just thought, and that inspired me, just thought, what would it really be like to be this guy, this heroic young battle mage with a magic staff, going off to get up to all sorts, who knows what. And there's only, not in a game, it's not set in a game like literary RPG, but so there was only one way to write it, to find out, and that was to write it. So the basic premise is 3 people who win a championship here in real life are suddenly whisked off, they have no idea where, separately, and these our hero is standing on the hillside with a crappy sword and shield going, what the hell happened? And he's being chased by wolves, and he has to try and figure out where he is, what happened, why he got, and it's all explained eventually. And a quest emerges that has the same feel as a game, perhaps, in that you have to do things in order to survive and to get answers. And one adventure leads to another. So suddenly this whole universe appeared. And I was,
So how did gaming spark a creative shift then? And at what point did you stop being a hobby and start becoming something bigger for you?
well, anything that I write isn't a hobby, and anything that I do that isn't writing is. So if I'm playing poker, I don't want to do it, as professionally, because it's not a good way to make a living. Um, but as a hobby, it's fine. I never want to be a pro. A recreational player is the level that I haven't played for a while. So just forgotten the question now.
Basically, I was just looking at how did gaming spark a creative shift in you, really?
Well, everything does. That's where I was going. That you keep whatever interests you. I mean, it would be very difficult to write a book that you're not interested in. Sometimes I've had to write scripts that I got paid to do that just were really tedious. It's like wading through treacle, and the pay was bad, and the hours were long, and you had to do it because your agent had got you the gig, and it was a few £100 to keep the wolf from the door. But really, enthusiasm. Ralph Waldo Emerson, the great American writer, said, "Nothing great was ever achieved without enthusiasm." And he's absolutely right. When you get an idea, go for it. That's why, for example, people change their mindset as well as career during their lives, and they go, this is what, I should be doing that. I shouldn't be doing this. That's where I want to go. And you just know, and you follow your dream.
So, building new worlds, what's the inspiration behind New Rock? Or the New Rock series?
Fantasy world that's ever been created from, going back to Beowulf, which is the great Anglo-Saxon poem from about 900 and something AD. They're all fantasy worlds. They're all worlds with strangenesses in them. Beowulf's got dragons and a monster that lives at the bottom of the lake. And you look at the Arabian Nights, these going back hundreds of years, thousands of years, the stories that form our culture. And all the great works in English, French, German, the Brothers Grimm stories set in magical forests. This is the root of our culture, because not all writing is reality based. T.S. Eliot said humankind cannot bear very much reality, and we can't. We like to go off into worlds of the what if. What's over that hill? Where's the magic castle? Where's the this? Where's the that? And these ideas are just fill us with excitement and pleasure, as well as I'm perfectly happy to read books set in the real world or in outer space or fantasy worlds. They're all input.
Yeah, I've come from the generation that's growing up. I suppose I'm 55, and we started off with a small computer and different games that we played, and now they've become just beyond comprehension. And I've seen, obviously, the last 10 or so years, or probably longer, there's a big influence on turning the game into a bit more of a story, isn't there? And then making it into films and stuff like that. So, influence of the gaming mechanics on the storytelling. Important is the story to the game player compared to the gameplay, if that makes sense, not being a gamer?
Well, the first answer is it's very important, and the second answer is it's limited. And I've had an excellent argument with somebody who wrote computer games once at one of these conventions. By argument, I mean discussion, not a quarrel, in which I was pointing out the obvious fact that games are limited because there are only two quests. There's go kill something or go fetch something. That's all there is. We call it kill or FedEx. And this writer was valiantly defending all the invention in the games. And I'm saying, yes, they are. I love these games. They're incredibly inventive. I love your work. It's very exciting, but it is all limited the way that a story in a book isn't. Because in a book, you can take people up areas that are not limited by the software. They can go, you simply have no idea where a book is going. You trust the writer, and you know, well, that seems to be the answer's pointing over there. And you don't have that in a game. What you do have in a game is the joy of being the hero of your own story. So you design your avatar, you make him an elf or an orc or a shit weasel or whatever the characters available are, and you equip him or her to however you want to be, and you set off into that world as that character. So you're not watching some guy on screen representing the hero. You are the hero, and you steer your character through thick and thin. So it's very, very immersive and involving. But then when you've been through it for a while, you realize, actually, they're all the same. This designer didn't want to hear me say that, but she kind of knew what I was talking about. She said, well, yes and no, but yes, but no. No, there's not. I mean, I need both. I've sort of come out at the other end of gaming. Once I got into writing my books, that was a whole universe available to me.
So how much of your storytelling then is influenced by gaming strategy, or was?
Not very much. No, I don't stick to that gaming template. In literary RPG, there are people who write books that are much more set in a game, where it's more obvious that they're being controlled by somebody, or they're pawns in some big cosmic game. Mine are not like that. Mine are set in, as I said, in their own world, but they're just people who happen to have come from our world because they were good at this kind of thing, and they're needed there. But it's for real. I mean, they're not going back.
What makes the New Rock world different from the traditional fantasy then?
It's the same but different. They all are. The world of Tolkien, who's the great influence in post-war fantasy writing, is, he said there would be no Lord of the Rings without Wagner, because the Ring cycle, 100 years earlier, 80 in his case, was seminal influence on Tolkien himself. And what was Wagner influenced by? By the Eddas, by the sagas, by medieval Germanic, Northern European literature, which in turn doesn't come from nowhere itself, the Greek myths. I mean, there are many excellent games set in ancient Rome or Greece, as well as the ones set in the future. But it all boils down to, if you understand story structure, which is the one thing you have to learn as a writer, and is unnatural, I think, for all of us, is that it's all very much based on the same skeletons, beginnings, middles, and ends. Set up. All story structure is set up and payoff. If you want something to pay off at the end, you've got to set it up at the beginning. That's in brief terms. Our stories set in other worlds could be just as well set in in a suburb in England in 1943. No, 53. Make it after the war, but without all the bells and whistles and excitement of spaceships or whatever there is. The structure is the same. It's important to learn that. I couldn't quite believe it when I went to a lot of classes and studied and worked with a lot of good directors and producers and script editors over the last 40 years, and learned this. For example, here in Hollywood, they used to say, we'll first write the scenario, then add the dialogue. First time I heard that, I was just, what? Because I'd come from a world, I'd written some plays and some adaptations and TV scripts and things like that. And basically, they are the dialogue. That's all there is the dialogue. So I had to learn how to step outside it, write an outline that sums up what you're going to write, and then go away and add the dialogue to it, which is completely unnatural to me. I just like to dive in and write and do my outline at the same time. So I'm constructing two documents. This is what I'm writing, and this is how I define it on the side. This is how I know what the structure is. And in the New Rock books, the chapters are all laid out. As I come to them, I know that, that's got to happen later, so that'll be another chapter. And then you go back and say, well, I need to fix that one. You're doing the two things at the same time, but the structure is vital. If you don't have structure, well, how do you know where you're going as a writer?
Yeah, and I looked at, you've got to see the opportunity in what you're doing as well. So when we talk a lot on the pod about transferable skills and bits and pieces like that. So you've got these transferable skills that looks like, comedy versus fantasy versus gaming type of, mixture of what you do. So how do you approach the creative problem solving across such different worlds?
Yeah, that's such a good question, because sometimes the problems are really big, and nobody's written your piece before. I mean, I've done a lot of adaptations of other things, like you write the books that have been written that you are given to adapt for a TV show or something. So that's already done. You've got the job there, so your job is to turn it from one medium into another. But if you're doing something for the first time, it can go anywhere, anything can happen. So you're, on one hand, you're keeping an eye open for opportunities. You know vaguely where you're going, because it doesn't all get done at once. I mean, writing a 150,000 word book, you don't have the idea and boom, it's done. It develops over the time as you explore the possibilities. Tolkien himself said in the introduction to The Lord of the Rings, the tale grew in the telling. And so he ended up with where he ended up, but he didn't know when he was starting out that he was going to go through all these steps. He needed to explore them and examine them. And he was the first person into that story. He takes us, the readers, with him. And that's what you do. You're making it up out of whole cloth. Even though you are part of the tradition, you're working with things that people might know, like, I don't know, a mage has a magic staff. Well, that's been done before. But what your mage does with your magic staff is completely different. So in general terms, all writing is the same, but in particular terms, yours is your problem. Nobody's going to solve it for you. And so you often have to back up and throw stuff away and realize, that's the wrong direction, and be ready to rewrite and to polish, which is where you get the gold.
Yeah, so I mean, I was going to ask you how but maybe it's has comedy shaped your dialogue and pacing in the fantasy writing?
Yeah, and I realized this when I got into New Rock. I thought it was going to be just an adventure story, but I'm a recovering comedy writer. You can't help it. So funny things happened along the way, and I realized that comedy and adventure have so much in common. They're both about the unexpected. They're both about things going wrong. They're both about challenges and disasters and people falling into puddles. And sometimes it's, not just the events, but what people are saying. They have a discussion. There's one bit in the first book where 3 of our guys are on the run, from the authorities behind them and the possibility ahead of them that they might get some kind of answer. And they have an argument about poetry, which is just nuts. It just came out of the story and was good fun. So there was absolutely no point in trying to block that off and say, "Ooh, this is a serious book. It mustn't have funny bits in it." No, go for it. It's light to dark, and it's what Hitchcock did with his films. He'd scare the crap out of you, and then he'd make you laugh, and then settle you back down, and then scare you again.
Yeah.
So that worked beautifully, because if you keep just scaring people, you get the law of diminishing returns. So comedy, I just can't help it. I mean, this is fun. My agent, who's American, her pitch was all the comedy, all the good, entertaining comic stuff that makes you laugh comes out of England. And she mentioned Douglas Adams, Terry Pratchett, who's sold tens of millions of books and is very, very good. She said all the funny stuff comes out of England. And there was a pause at the end of the phone once, and the voice said, "We take our fantasy very seriously." So she called me up and we said, well, perhaps we don't send it to that particular publishing house. Why should they? And they must do what they want. But it's natural for me to have things happen that are off the wall. Because, I mean, actually, if you think about it, fantasy is off the wall, isn't it?
Really? Yeah. I mean, and I was going to say about the word reinvention and second acts, but it seems like a bit of an evolution more than a reinvention for yourself. But, reinventing later in life, or, what advice would you give someone considering a second act now that you've kind of been through that?
Well, I think in my case, the reinvention is just going from um, one project to another, in that they can all be very different from each other. So you're sort of doing the same but different. Now, if you're going to reinvent yourself and say, look, I'm not going to be doing this job anymore. I'm going to go off. I'm fed up with. Look, my publisher was a big guy on Wall Street, and he just didn't want to do it anymore, and so he set up a small independent publishing company. He works 90,000 hours a day and loves it. And he's exhausted, but he's made a good success of his very young pub. He's only been around for 15 years or so, doing very well. And, this is what he wants to do. So he just had the determination to, right, I'm not going to waste my life doing that anymore. Chasing money around was not what motivated him. He just loves books. He loves the publishing world, even though it's actually a very tough and frustrating world, I think. But we meet at conventions and have a martini and share our share our differences about the world. But he's a remarkable man, and all credit to him for saying, look, I'm not going to stay in Wall Street and keep earning this stupid amount of money. I'm going to do what I love, and I think if you do what you love, then I've worked with 3 people who came from nowhere. One of them would be Rowan Atkinson. Another would be Danielle Denise, the English, well, she's Australian soprano opera star. She just got an Olivier for a Lifetime Award, and I cast her in my first opera and her first opera when she was just a week before her 15th birthday. And she opened when she was 16. And she's just great. It's quite obvious that people like Rowan and her are going to get anywhere. They don't need you. They're just so good. But it's lovely to have been involved at some point. Another person I've taught who's doing really well, just say, look, you don't want to be waiting around at 80 and saying, I wish I'd done it. Give it a go. Be prepared to fail. And she wanted to get into drama school. So she's in England and I'm over here, and I work with her on technique, via Skype and doing scenes with other actors and cold readings. She got into her first choice of drama school and is doing fine. So just, why have regrets? You can't regret failing, giving it a go and failing. If I'd never attempted to be a writer, I would just really regret it. Even if I'd never written anything very good, I'd just be a deluded fool who thought he could do it. But at least I'd tried.
Well, you're obviously very good at embracing curiosity, aren't you, in your life? But did you ever
to be? Yeah.
have you ever had any ever had to overcome any fear of starting out a new or did you just take that in your stride?
Fear's a great question. I did a play. To some extent, this is not completely true and it's not completely false. To some extent, writing and directing are the same job. Now, I've written things that other people have directed that they've done so much better than I could have done that I just learnt tons from them. And other things I've seen them, that's a disappointment. And some things I've directed myself. So I always wanted to complete the process by getting the play or whatever it is done as it occurred to me. And of course, you're working with other people and bringing their skills on as actors. Actors aren't just interpreters; their job is to create. And I did a play once in the West in a fringe theatre in London, and one of the actors who did it was a much more experienced director than I was. And during the rehearsals, I just sort of find myself gradually moving to the back of the rehearsal room and letting him get on with it. And just, there was no sense of, look, I'm very important, I'm the director, I ought to be doing this, and no sense of him saying, oh, Richard, you've got no clue what you're doing, let me take over. It was just natural, and I was, and after rehearsals, I'd sit around and talk with him and just learn, just absorb. I was so lucky to have him. The guy, I learnt more from him than from anybody else. And it was just extraordinary to see work that you'd written lifted. And instead of just being this level, it's up there and you go, wow, thank you. So yeah, you learn as you go along. So that kind of, when I got over that, I realized, yeah, actors really can do this to your work. They can be that good. And so when I directed other things, I worked really hard with the actors on getting them to be as good as they possibly could be, and encouraging them to go for broke, and working on the text, you know, full stop to what the most important thing that happens in this speech happens between the end of that sentence and the beginning of the next one. There's a journey, there's a realization, there's a what's he thinking, what's she going, what does she realize in that moment? Does she reverse herself? Does she just suddenly discover this guy's a lunatic who's going to kill me? Has he suddenly realized that, what happens? And so when an actor gets on the train and just does a speech like this, babble, 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 babble from one sentence to another, they're missing the opportunity. And the work it doesn't deserve that. It offers them far more opportunity. I mean, look at To Be or Not to Be in Hamlet. I mean, there's a lot of journeys in that where he goes from one thought to the next, reverses himself, goes on. And so once you get some confidence as a director and you learn how to explore text, your own text or someone else's with actors, it's just really, really exciting to bring it to. I mean, I don't really direct other people's work, but a few years ago we did an opera here at the Los Angeles Opera that I'd written the libretto, and Placido Domingo conducted it, and that was just a joy. I just directed that like a play, and really the actors worked through the text, not just the singing, and so the story came to life. I was thrilled with the work they did.
So there's curiosity.
Sorry.
I was just saying there's curiosity and all this, that need to poke and understand. You're very detailed. How does that keep you staying creative? Or is it a better way of saying what does keep you staying?
I think it does keep you being creative, because you're always second guessing yourself. You're always thinking around corners. You're always doing, well, yeah, that's so far so good, but if we rest on our laurels here, there's actually more to be explored. Just in this sentence, there's more. And when you're having creating a story, you go, oh, that's interesting. And like when I've happened to have a really excellent editor, and at one point in the first book, she said, I really love what's happening between this inanimate object and this person. That's a real relationship you've got there. I've never seen that before. I want more of it. Quite often editors say, cut, there's too much, or trim. Well, apart from doing that, she also said, go on, more, encouraging you to go for it. And you go, and then something just opens up and you go, oh yeah, there's a rabbit hole there, let's dive down it. So you always try and keep your options open, but quite often you don't know what those options are. They reveal themselves, you get help from other people. There's no easy pill to take that gives you all the answers to writing everything.
Well, look, we're going to close down in a little bit. I won't keep you much longer, but I normally do a quick questions round, really, just to keep things flowing, and just a few questions. Some fun, some silly, if you can answer them. Have gaming strategies ever leaked into your real life?
God, yes. Absolutely. We learn through play as children. Go to school, you do games, you do sports. Absolutely. You learn from team sports, you learn from individual sports. I love to play what we in America call soccer, I'm afraid to say. I love to play that. I played for the village football team in England until I was in nearly 40. But I also liked individual sports. I did judo and stuff for a while. And you learn those techniques from reversing other people's momentum, and play is really, yeah. I mean, I can't stress highly enough how important games are, just in terms of developing thinking.
So, comedy versus fantasy, which is harder?
Comedy, definitely, and I can say that confidently because you've either got it or you haven't. Long time. Oh, do you want a story about this, or has we not got much time? One great man, I can't remember who it was, Herbert Beerbohm Tree or someone, on his deathbed said, "Dying is easy, comedy is hard." So.
Okay, Richard, I think we'll close up. A few slight technical issues going on there, but we'll put all where we can find Richard on the websites and socials underneath in the chat. But if this episode proves everything, is that the next level of your life might just be waiting for you to press start. I really thank you for coming on, Richard. The end is happened the way it has. I'm sure. Wish you luck. We'll all follow you. Fascinating, fantastic interview. Thank you very much.
Thanks so much for listening to Not Finished Yet. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you hit subscribe so you never miss a conversation. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, share it with them. Please see the links to all our socials. Until next time, remember, you're not finished yet.